Good morning, folks, from Glasgow and the little flock here. I'm down feeding them just. This is the mature sheep. So today's story is a little bit different than any other stories I've done. One, it's going to be a lot longer, and it takes in three parts really. The first part is the sinking of the Princess Victoria ferry out of Donaghadee. Then the second part of the story comes from Philip Warnock of Portavogie, who's a fisherman. And Philip's relating his stories of the sea, some tragic, some happy, and little stories in and around Portavogie as well of childhood. And there's other folk from Portavogie taking part in this as well, adding their bit into it. And the third part of the story is on a character called Lame Andy, Andy Young. Now, he was Gibson's father's relative, that is Gibson's relative as well, obviously, that plays in the band with me. So that's our story. It's in three parts. But now, you know when you go into the shop and you get a packet of buns and you look at the wee label and it says allergies on it, and it says this contains coconut or whatever. Well, I think at this point I have to give you a little bit of warning that this contains some hard-hitting gospel things, and if you would be allergic to the gospel and flare up with it, there's a wee button on your iPhone or your laptop or whatever you're watching this. Hit it and it'll switch it off. But anyway, that's the stories that are coming up now, so here we go.
Our own Titanic in the Irish Sea. What's that, you tell me? Well, January 31st, 1953, at 1400 hours, or it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the motor vessel Princess Victoria, she turned over onto her starboard side, and she sinks 5 mile north-northeast off the Copeland Islands off Donaghadee, in 52 fathoms of water. Now that's 312 feet. It was wild bad water. The waves was 40 to 45 foot high, and the one was force 8 to 12. That's 70 mile an hour plus. There was sleet, heavy rain, and the crew pushed on for an hour to be fast at 8 o'clock in the morning. And 6 hours later, of sheer terror, nature won the battle, just like the Titanic. And there were only 44 folk survived out of 178 passengers and crew. They say that the wee band on Titanic played Nearer My God to Thee as the ship was sinking. Well, I wonder, was the folk thinking about this? And was this wee song in their mind when that hope was lost on the Princess Victoria as she was sinking? If you were in that position, where would your soul be? Mair close to thee, my God, near Han am brought. The mair it was a cross that in me rocked, yet I my song will be, mair close, my God, to thee, near hand to thee, my God, near hand to thee.
I was about 13 years of age, and I was coming home from school and on my own, and for some unknown reason I just decided that I would come down onto the beach and come along the beach because my house is right down on the beach. And as soon as I come down, I saw this large crowd just where we're at here, just on the sand, and curiosity got the better of me, so I started to trot to see why the people were all gathered together. And as soon as I pressed my way through the crowd, and I saw something that frightened me. I knew that there was something serious about it. There was a cover lying, but I could see the form of a body below the cover. And I mind somebody asked me, Aunt Lizzie, could they see the form of the body? And they lifted the cover, and it was his face, and a young man. He was the chief, one of the engineers of the Princess Victoria. Mm-hmm. Now, how he come to be here, my cousin Alexander Montgomery, he had a small boat, and he just happened to be looking out to sea here, and he saw something floating in the water, and the birds were hovering over it, and he thought it was something peculiar. So he got his wee boat out and rowed out, and sure enough, it was one of the bodies. It was the body that was here, and he secured the body to the wee boat. He couldn't bring it aboard because the wee boat wasn't capable, and he brought the body in here. And I was only 13 years of age at that particular time, and I never forgot it. It stuck to my mind, and it was so sad because he didn't drown. He had a cork type of a life raft, and he didn't get time to tie the bottom bit, and when he jumped off the boat, it choked him. That's what the doctor said, that he didn't drown or see water drowning. He actually choked, and that was it. So just a day or two after that, there was a boat washed in here just on this side of the harbour, and we as children, this was something. It was a fairly big boat, maybe about 30 odd foot. But we didn't know at that particular time it was one of the lifeboats belonging to the Princess Victoria. Now, we were fishing. We were fishing out of Donaghadee, and we were what you call pelagic, and our net was off the bottom, poor ground, and we come fast. And somebody was shouted at some of the boats, we're fasting something here, and we gave the readings of where we were up and down with a net, and they said, "Oh, that's the Princess Victoria. You're in."
Oh, you're clicked up on the rack.
That's the Princess Victoria. And I said, "Oh dear." So we got a part of the net in, and one of the doors in, and we were up and down, and the boat was sagging like that there, and all of a sudden she jumped. We didn't break the rope, but we pulled a wee David out of her.
Oh, out of the Victoria herself,
A wee David with a wee pulley block, and the pulley block was still operational after all that time. So those are things. Unfortunately, that wee David was lost. It may have been of interest to the Donaghadee lifeboat company.
That's right.
Could have been like that. That's lost. So really, that's it. The fishing is a very, very hazardous game. I've seen a lot of tragedy and sorrow, pain at that job, but I loved it. It was in my blood. But there was an instance in my experience in life, young man at the age of 24, I had a cousin the same age, and James Montgomery. here.
Way here?
Yes, that's James. We were fishing, and it was an Easter week, 1964, and the weather turned out very, very bad, and it was just a matter of everybody looking after themselves and just keeping themselves safe. We had 2 hauls of fish. The deck was full of fish at that particular time, and my brother asked my father, he says, maybe that would do us the day. And he says, we'll just have 1 more haul, and we'll go ashore then, because I won't be out. I'll be going to the Easter conference in the Gospel Hall.
Mm-hmm.
So while we were making the 3rd haul, everybody was just going about their business, trying to get as many fish and got it cleaned and washed as possible. The gear was being shot at the same time, and James was on the starboard side of the wheelhouse. Alan and I, my brother, was on the port side, and it was coming on close to shooting the net. And there was another chap on the other side. He was watching the coils of rope going out, and I shouted across to James. James was ready to shoot, and he put his hand up, and we walked up the side deck where we shot the net off, and he shot the hinder part of the net. But we waited on James coming up around the wheelhouse. At that time we couldn't see him, and we shouted at the other chap who we could see, tell James to hurry up. Not in any angry way, but just, and he looked round, he says, James is not here.
Go on.
Gone.
Quick as that.
Now, cut it brief. I couldn't tell you the feeling, what it felt like, and it was an awful experience. Words couldn't explain it. But 3 months later, there was a Polish boat come into the channel to fish, and everybody was checking their trawl nets every time they hauled to see if they had maybe perchance picked the remains of James up. And this Polish boat come on to one of the Portavogie boats. He says, I've picked the remains of a body up. And his own, his own broken English. And there was, the boats caught together. It was a fine day, and they were able to pass the remains of the body, and it healed a big wound. And the whole family, the Montgomery family and the Warnock family. So that's life at sea.
Where was he buried? I thought, do you know, the Portavogie here?
He's buried in Glasgow Cemetery.
That's Presbyterian?
The Presbyterian Cemetery. Aye. That's.
Well, you see these boys here?
Yes.
These youngs, they're friends of mine. Andy Young and Andy Young Jr., that was the boy they called Liam Andy.
Yes.
Them boys were in the lifeboat. They were along with my Uncle Bob and that.
Aye.
And that was when I was in Cloughie. And then I moved from Cloughie up to here at the Portavogie.
Yes.
But them boys, a great experience. And they went out in a wee boat.
Aye.
And got lost just out there in the tide. It wasn't even a bad day, and they didn't know what happened to them or who the two of them was lost. Jan was washed up on the shore here, and Ian, he was washed up. We got him, I think it was 2 or 3 months later, in Isle of Man.
That's right.
So that, and yet you would have thought them boys would have been perfectly safe, but you were saying there about James, you just never know the minute. Yeah, they had loads and loads of experience, and not ours. It was a good day of it.
I heard that there was a bit of rise and fall at that particular day. It was a fine day, but there was still a rise and fall.
Big swell.
Yes, and they had got in against the close to the rocks to shoot the creels. The logs were right up against the rocks. And the boat had ris and had come down on a rock, and it tipped the boat right over on her side.
Held them out, right.
I think that's what. And we never could know why one brother was picked up here
And
the other brother. But when you go south here, the current runs east and west, north and south.
Right.
And that brother that was picked up on the island had went farther south and got caught on the flood tide.
So and it's stuck him back across the top.
They never, the people that discovered the body on the shore on the island, they had no way of identifying. There was no identification of who the person was. So they buried the body with the hope that somebody would discover who this person was. They got to hear word of this stranger that was buried in the Isle of Man, and they went across, they exhumed the body, and sure enough, it was the one that they were looking for, that brother. Now that's a second hand, what I'm telling you, but that's what I know of it. It was a very sad occasion, that too. Very, very sad.
Well, you know, your boy Liam Andy, you'd maybe remember Philip that he was in a wheelchair.
Aye, that's right.
And folk used to push him around the countryside, isn't that right?
That's right. The only recollection that I've had of Liam Andy, I never knew the man before, but I heard about him. You know, he was an invalid at a particular time and in a wheelchair. And the wheelchair was just like an armchair, more or less, 3 wheels. And it was motivated by 2 arms, just the same as you would pedal a bicycle, and that's the way that he went. But it must have been coming up on Christmas time. We were coming home from school. There was 2 or 3 of us, my chums, and Liam Andy was at the bottom of the Pink Brae, and he was labouring to get up the hill. I don't think that he would actually made it. And we got behind him, and looking back, you know, you can laugh at the idea. We were only children, maybe 8, 9, 10-year-old, and we got behind him, and there wasn't much piff where anyways, but we just got him up over the 2 brows like that there, and he thanked us very much and went on his journey. That's the only thing that I know about Liam Andy.
It's amazing how them boys with their years and fishing boats and lifeboats and bad water, and yet they were just out there. You may say, what would it be? Would it be 2 mile off the shore? Would it even be that hard? North Road.
It's 20 minutes steaming in a fishing boat at 9 knots to the perch. 20 minutes, so that would be 2.5 miles.
Like I'm looking, I can see it just out around the corner of the house on her, and within the eye shot, you know. And them boys are that experienced, and they're lost at the Hannah Hame.
My grandfather was Johnny Young, and he was born in Rotala and lived in Rotala. His brother was Andy, also known as Liam Andy, because when he was a child, one of his siblings had dropped him and he must have broken his back, and he was always in a wheelchair. Johnny and his brother, and Johnny's son, also known as Andrew, they fished on a wee lobster boat off the coast here, and their boat was called the Risha. So they were drowned, unfortunately, in an accident. I was only about a year old, so I have no memory of my grandfather or Uncle Andy, or even my Uncle Andy, for that matter. But when they were drowned, you have to think now, my grandfather Johnny was 75, and Liam Andy was in his 80th year. Andrew was only 25, but anything could have happened, you know, any illness or anything at that age when they were on the boat. But I think the weather had been fine that morning, from what I'm led to believe, and it had changed in the afternoon. But anyway, the two men were found locally. Their bodies, that's Liam Andy and young Andy, his nephew. But Johnny, his body was washed up in Peel in the Isle of Man, and he was buried there. And my father had been in the RAF. He was in the RAF before the war, and that was Johnny's son, Tommy. And he was in the RAF after the war. And his last posting was in the German-Russian border in a place called Lübeck. And he'd bought a penknife for my grandfather and brought it home to him. And some of the fishermen had been telling him that there had been a body washed up in Peel because his father hadn't been found. So they went to Peel, and they found his money, wallet, and they found this penknife, so he knew it was his father that had been buried there. So they exhumed his body and they brought it back here, and he's buried along with Andy in Cloughy Graveyard. That's the old church further up in Cloughy that's closed at the moment.
And we all went down to the beach. The beach was down at beside Finnegan Hall there, the second cottage. That's where Liam Andy lived with his niece. So all gathered down there, and it was a beautiful night, and I remember the moon shining down the water, and we were all shouting, Andy, 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 but there was no response. And then I think it was, I'm not sure, but I think it was the next day they got Andy's body, the lifeboat got him. But he was a lovely, lovely man. He was very pleasant. And I remember him coming down in his wee wheelchair, and he could handle it so well. And he was always dressed so nice and neatly, and he had lovely, a black knitted jumper, you know, these fishermen's jumpers. His niece knitted it, and he was always lovely and laughing, and we joked with him, you know. It was great times.
I'm Mark Simpson, and this is Mary McGregan. Me and Mary both live down the pad in Rotala, and we're just wanting to tell the wee story about the boat that went missing. It sank just out at the pier here from where we live. Mm-hmm. And Mary, could you tell me a wee bit about what you remember back in the day?
Well, I remember the day before it was blowing a gale, and Johnny used to always come up to my dad's, and he was in my dad's the next day, and young Andy come up, and he says to him, this old man wants to go out to look the cradles. And Johnny had said to him, now tell him it's all right, we'll day it tomorrow. He says, you know what he's like, he wants out the day. So Johnny went away, done, and they went out. And then, well, they never come back, but the lifeboat toured up and down all night. Everybody was out and about, talking about Johnny and Andy and young Andy being lost.
Being lost, yeah.
You know, and then the lifeboat had toured up and down all night, and in the morning they got young Andy on the rock, and it was the blowing of his blonde hair that caught their eye, and they had brought him in, and later on, I think, or the next day was it, that there was talk of Andy being got, old Andy, this is Liam Andy, got up at Kearney there, no Kearney, up
the Gowans caravan
up there,
yes.
And Wally Gowan was taking the cows along to the field, and the cows wouldn't go by. And this was when he discovered Andy's body lying in the sand. Well, then Johnny, he wasn't got for about 6 weeks, maybe three weeks to 6 weeks. He was got in the Isle of Man. And they brought him over in Robert Coffey's boat. And the girl Doreen, and they brought him into Portavogie Harbour. And then they were buried up in Cloughy, up in the old graveyard.
The Presbyterian.
Yes.
So, Mary, you were saying a wee bit about that that somebody maybe tried to save one of them or something you were telling me about?
They always the thought that Johnny was a good swimmer, and they surmised that maybe Johnny had put Andy onto the rock,
Right.
and he had went back maybe to bring Johnny. This is just the surmise that, and he had went back to bring Andy. But with him being age, he was over 70. But with the age being there, he must have maybe took a heart attack or something. But he didn't get him, and they were buried, as I say, up in Cloghy.
Right, there you go. Very sad, Mary.
Oh,
back in
it
the
was
day,
it
wasn't
was sad. It was because everybody knew Johnny and they knew our land. Johnny's cat, it was called Cribbin.
Cribbin.
Because it had got its, it must have got and wowed the cribbin, and it had nipped it, so it was like sort of wee bit lame.
All right.
And when Johnny, when they did, they were all up in arms about Johnny. The cat must have went out and got into the punt.
My goodness.
And the next morning the cat was still there, sitting waiting on him coming.
Sitting waiting for him, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Powerful.
So that's Johnny and them. That's a legend. I'm just looking out at the rock where they were drowned.
When I was child, maybe about 10-year-old, there was a lot of jetsam coming ashore after the war, and you would have picked up flares and smoke floats. They were numerous. They were scattered all over the beach at that particular time, and you just discarded them. You never, they were so common that you never.
2 a penny, as I say.
Aye, you never took. But there was one day my brother Alan, who was 3.5 miles, he would have been about 13 or 14 at that particular time, and the two of us come down onto the beach. So we saw this wooden box, and there was numbers and names stamped on it, like a print.
Aye.
But we couldn't make it out, and the box was painted green, about maybe about 3 foot by about 2 foot wide and about that depth. So we went to lift it, and it was quite heavy, but we were able to manage, I don't know how, to trail it up off the beach, up the road, and into the back garden of where we lived.
Right.
Without anybody seeing us, because we were very curious to what was inside this box. It was like what that song, The Green Door, what's behind the green door. So
right.
we were we were very curious. We had no tools whatsoever to open the box. I don't know how we got it open, but eventually we pressed the boards up, and what was in it, the 2 bombs that they would have had on the jet planes at that particular, aeroplanes at that particular time, about 3 foot, and with the warhead on it. But we did not know. We knew they were bombs, but we didn't know the potential of those 2 bombs. They would have blew half the village up if they had exploded. But anyway, there were some of my seniors, maybe 10 or 12 year old, older than me, and they had got into the idea of making cartridges for the 12-bore shotgun. So my friend come along with a hammer and chisel.
Right.
Aye. So he started a hammer, and eventually got the chisel through, small hole he got there, and they were able to bring some of the powder. It was sort of blackish grey out.
Oh.
So we're wondering, was there any potential in this powder? Would it burn? So somebody got a box of matches. The bombs were sitting here, powder was here, spilt on the grass, the back garden, and it was striking like out there, nothing happened. But somebody at last struck a match and held it in long. And all I knew was I was lying on my back with no eyebrows or eyelashes, and part of my hair blue and burnt, the face burnt. And I got up and I saw nothing but red blobs falling down. My uncle Adam, who was familiar with the war, in fact he had come through 2 world wars,
Right.
and he knew right away what it was. He didn't see it, but he knew what happened. He threw his shield down on the ground. Well, that's as far as that went. So, to cut a long story short, my father heard the bang, and he come running up the garden, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he chased us. So everybody scattered. My father dug a deep hole in the garden, and he mixed a batch of concrete up and hid it well and secure. And eventually the grass grew over the concrete, it spread all over the concrete, and that was forgot about. They were buried forever, never to be recovered. So, I was married in 1963, just settled into the wee house. My father had bought another house at that particular time, and we had settled into this wee house. And they started to put the sewage system in at that particular time, that pumping station over there. So there was a gentleman who was the foreman. I knew him personally, he was from here. I went to him, I says, "You better watch what you're doing," because they were starting to blast. Our garden was the rock come up to nearly the surface, so they had to cut a way through it. I says, "You better watch what you're doing there." He says, "Why?" I says, "There's 2 World War II bombs there." And I pointed and I scraped the grass away below that concrete. He says, "What?" So he it wasn't a mobile then. He got in touch with the authorities, and before long there was jeeps, army jeeps lying down the road. They come round with a gag counter or something like that there, and they sounded like that there, but they lifted the concrete up, dug into the ground. Bombs were gone.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Somebody must have yucked them now.
They were made into cartridges.
Oh, right, so the boys come back when everybody was away, and
So he knew nothing whatsoever about it.
right.
So at that particular time, nobody had a bin. Everybody dug a hole in the back garden. It was all done like it was a local idea of getting rid of your refuge then, your refuse then. And every now and again, teet teet teet, and they dug a 10, bean 10, a pea 10. He says this is supposed to have been a rubbish dump. And I was humiliated, but there you are. That's the story. You know, that is a true story, but we don't know where the bombs went. So the story closed then. That was it. As a child, we had no top water in our house, so we had to walk across the bay. When the tide was back, to get water from this pump. And my brother Alan and I, it was who carried the last bucket of water. Because when we drew a bucket of water from here, the time that we had reached home, it was half full. We had hitting our legs and so. And no, it was me that got the last bucket. It's your turn now, and that was the way we brought the water. This pump here was it's Wilson from Portavogie. Whether he made the pump or whether he put it here or not, I couldn't tell. But this pump served the whole of the community here. There was no footpath at that particular time. It was the shore or through the fields, whatever way you could get to this pump. There was no water like it in Northern Ireland. It was pure. And whenever they put the water into the houses, we couldn't drink it because we're used to pure filtered water that come through the ground from a hill farther up the village. That's the source of water. So they put the water to make it more convenient into the houses from Loch Cowie at that particular time, and it was difficult to drink, to get used to it. A cup of tea was a different cup then. So that's about all that I know of this pump. But there happens to be, that's not the original pump now. We'll take you down to show you where the original pump really was. Now, this pump that we're about to look at is the original pump for this area, the north end of Portavogie, as we called it. I have to say with shame that we used this pump after it was left as target practice. As young people would have used this here for throwing stones at. So eventually it come to be what it's like now through our rascality and through fun, but we're children. So we're right down on the very beach here, but yet the water was pure. It was beautiful. It was cold, and it made a lovely cup of tea. So that's the original pump. I have very happy memories as a child growing up of this particular area here. It was known before I was born as the cove. Mm-hmm. And we used this here for diving and swimming and the whole bay. This was nearly on a daily basis during the summertime when the weather was clement. Many happy days we spent here, and this is the Cove Rock here, and I saw it at times. You could hardly got sat down for people from all over the village. They would have come to this particular area.
Sort of the meeting place.
It was splendid for diving off. There's plenty of water when the tide was in, and you didn't know the day going in. Cold never bothered you because everybody was in the same frame of mind to enjoy a swim, and we had competitions. This is hard to believe, but we had competitions to see if we could dive in here and get to that rock over there without surfacing.
What's a ferry that?
and we were able to do it as young people, not me alone, but everybody, because you had your credibility to maintain.
Had to keep the side up.
And if you didn't reach the other rock, you were rubbish, more or less. So that's really it. This bay has a lot of fond memories to me. Years and years ago, there was a row of houses there. They're gone now, but people actually lived in them. I haven't mine of it, but people actually lived in them. But when the weather was very bad and the wind a certain shape, it would have actually broke their doors down. The sea coming in. So the people abandoned it and they shifted further in. But this, a lovely wee bay down there, they called it purgatory, because the problem with it, when the seaweed come in, it piled up there, and all the farmers, local farmers, drew seaweed out of it. But there was a problem. When you loaded the cart, the horse or horses were not able to bring the carts out, and you had a 50-50 chance of getting out of it. So they called it purgatory. Now I haven't named, but that's the name. But I wouldn't say that to discredit anybody or anybody's beliefs, but that's just why it was called that name. But they're just known locally, and I have happy, fond memories of my growing up years, which will never be erased from my mind.
That's great.
O Jesus, friend unfailing, how dear art thou to me. Our cares or fears assailing, I find my strength in thee. Why should my feet grow weary of this my pilgrim way? Rough though the path and dreary, it ends in perfect day. Why should I droop in sorrow